everyone, I am Jada Dickens. I'm a senior in Mr. Davis's first hour AP Psych class, and I'm going to be teaching you guys about something called the Enneagram system, Enneagram personality system today. So, some of you may have heard of the Enneagram, some of you are probably wondering what the heck I'm saying, but I promise by the end of this video you will become somewhat of an Enneagram expert. So yeah, I'm going to be teaching you guys about the Enneagram today. So what makes the Enneagram a lot better, in my opinion, than the Myers-Briggs or the DISC or any part of Jungian theory, to me, is that the Enneagram allows so much room for you to be a human being. And so it doesn't place you in any type of box. It says, okay, I see you in your best times and in your worst times, and I'm going to help you figure out how to recognize your habits and stress and how to kind of push yourself towards health. So it's so super cool. I have been absolutely obsessed with so many different personality systems throughout the years. I love Myers-Briggs, I love DISC, I love StrengthsFinder, I love all the ones that Davis is having us take. But in my opinion, the Myers-Briggs is the most thorough, and it really captures someone's essence as opposed to their habits. So you can tell me I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs, in the Myers-Briggs, but that doesn't allow a ton of room for me to be a healthy ENFP or an unhealthy ENFP, and yeah, whereas and in the DISC I can be a healthy ID or an unhealthy ID, but it doesn't really help you define that or push you towards any kind of growth. Whereas the Enneagram is this amazing tool that that can be used to really just propel you towards the best version of yourself and help you realize who that is. And so I just love it, and my whole family has become really passionate about it and super interested in it, and it for us has really changed our relationships with each other. It's changed my relationships with my friends because it is such a tool for the betterment of myself and for finding empathy for others, because the Enneagram is essentially based around this idea that your personality is built around trying to make yourself feel better about the ways that you've been hurt in the past. And so you have one huge hurt throughout your life that then you kind of create your personality around to keep yourself safe. And yeah, so that's the main theory of the Enneagram, is that we are all hurt beings trying to disguise it with a personality. And so different hurts are going to create different types of humans. And so the type of human I am a counterphobic type 6 with a split wing. And by the end of this whole video, you are going to absolutely know what that means. But for right now, I understand if you do not. That's what I'm here for. So let's go ahead and jump in. I am first going to show you you might hear my family I'm in my attic, so that I have kind of a crazy, very loud family, so if you hear them in the back, no one's dying, they're just wrestling with the dogs probably. So this is the Enneagram, this jumble of lines and circles and numbers and all that stuff, but I promise this visual representation is so helpful in understanding the best parts of the Enneagram. So, to kind of start defining this, or helping you understand it a little bit better, the Enneagram Enneagram is made up of 9 different types, which are in a circle because, I'm so sorry, which are in a circle because all of the types are interconnected. So the people who made this weren't scientists, and that's another thing that separates the Enneagram from any other personality indicator, was that the Enneagram was made by deeply spiritual people. It was actually created by monks to help them really achieve their best self. And so it doesn't just say, this is who you are, it says, this is who you could be. And so they also understood that personality is a very fluid thing. It isn't just, this is who you are, period. Every ENFP is going to act exactly like this. Every ID is going to act exactly like this. It's saying, there's so many different facets that it basically says, this is who you are, this is specifically who you are, this is even more specifically who you are, and all of this is up to you. Which I think is really cool. But so it kind of, it really encompasses the fact that personality is a very fluid thing. And so all of the lines that you'll see there represent who you become in stress and in health. So kind of just to explain that. So I personally am a type 6, as I said, so I'm going to go ahead and use myself as an example. So this is type 6 right here, and these lines are who I become in stress and in health. And so in stress, I'm going to take on the bad qualities of a type 3, and in health, I'm going to take on the good qualities of a type 9. So yeah, this is super helpful for realizing the different parts of each type. And for the stress and health, they have designated 9 different stages of stress and health, and 9 being the lowest, 1 being the highest. There are 3 levels of health, 3 levels of normalcy, and 3 levels of stress. And so yeah, that's kind of how that part of this really cool system works. Then after that, there are these things called wings. And so you may have heard me earlier say that I have a split wing, which is a new theory in the Enneagram, which is the Enneagram is still extremely new. And so there hasn't been as much testing. There hasn't been as much, nothing is as set in stone because, like I said, these monks kept it a secret for such a long time. It was like a super heavily guarded secret was the Enneagram because they didn't want people to misuse it. Because, like I said, it is a really powerful tool, which, when used incorrectly, can really hurt people. People can either hurt themselves or hurt other people. And so, and again, I'm going to use myself as an example here. So if this is my little type 6 self, this is my personality, this green Lego block here. I had some of my brother's Legos behind me, and so I was like, I'll use this as a visual representation because it is a pretty difficult thing to understand. So if this is my personality, then on either side of me, because this is how numbers work, and because we're in a circle, there's going to be a 5 and a 7. And if you know anything about the Enneagram, and you have ever said, I'm a 2 with an 8 wing, that's not a thing. Your wing has to be right next to your number. And I'm so glad that Mr. Davis gave me a platform to say that on, because the amount of people that I meet, and I'm like, and the Enneagram comes up, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I know so much about the Enneagram. I'm a 4 with a 7 wing. And I'll be like, oh, that's great. I'm so glad that you're a 4 with a 7 wing. But it's a very easy mistake to make. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm sorry. But yeah, so you can only have a wing that is right next to you. And essentially what these wings are going to do, so if this is a 5 and a 7, what these wings are going to do is they're going to influence my personality. And I'm going to be a little bit like a 5, and I'm going to be a little bit like a 7 if I'm a 6. Let's say I'm a 2. I'm going to be a little bit like a 1, and I'm going to be a little bit like a 3. And that's another super cool thing about the Enneagram, is that it allows that fluidity of personality. And so some people have super dominant wings, which is the main theory in the Enneagram, is that you have a dominant wing and then the other wing is just kind of hanging out. But a fairly new theory that I personally believe to be correct, because this is the way that I am, is that you can have a split wing. And so a 5 and a 7 are going to influence my 6 personality equally. So I'm going to have the same amount of traits from a 5 and a 7. They're going to be equal, but I'm still mainly going to act like a 6. But how a lot of people work is, let's say you're a 4, you're going to have a dominant 5 wing, but you're still going to kind of be influenced by 3. And so yeah, those are wings, and I love the fact that that is included in the Enneagram. And the wing really strongly determines what each type is going to act like. And because you're having this whole other personality really influence your personality. And so I know for 6s, you can either be, so if you're a 6 with a 5 wing, you can either be called the guardian, or if you're a 6 with a 7 wing, which I thought I had a dominant 7 wing for a while, but if you're a 6 with a 7 wing, then you're called the buddy. So they really influence your personality in a pretty big way. So that's how the Enneagram system works, and now I'm going to get to describing the actual types. So I'm going to start with type 1. I'm going to start at the very beginning with type 1. And type 1s are called the perfectionist, which is actually a name that I like a lot for type 1s. I believe, don't hold me to this because it is totally up to him what he is, but I believe that Mr. Davis is a type 1. So that's a type 1 that you know fairly well, hopefully. So yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good example. And type 1s are motivated by wanting to perfect the world. And so you'll see type 1s do really amazing things. My church leader is a type 1. She leads the music team, and she's a type 1, and so she is such a perfectionist that you see every single Sunday just this amazing group of people who is coming together with a large purpose, and is putting on a really good show, because you have this person orchestrating it who is really detail oriented. And but what you're going to learn about each type, and what I told you a little bit about earlier, was that types are mostly defined by what their greatest hurt has been, and then their personality reflects that. And that's another thing I really like about it, is that it really sees you for kind of what you've been through, or what you feel like you've been through, because we all have these huge stories, and everyone has their weight to carry, and so the Enneagram really covers that, and it's like, hey, I recognize the fact that you are carrying this on your shoulders all the time, and that because of that weight that you're carrying, this is going to be your personality. And so the weight that a 1 is carrying is feeling like they themselves are inherently bad, and they have this thing called an inner critic that is constantly telling them all of the ways which they have failed. And so they're acting out of that hurt by perfecting the world, because they want so badly for their actions to be good. They want so badly for themselves to be good. And so yeah, you see them just doing these amazing things because they want so badly for their inner critic, which is constantly going in their heads, essentially being like, you didn't say hi to that person well enough, you, that class that you taught, you said too much, or even bigger things like, you are inherently bad. Everything you do is bad, and so they're constantly working out of this this fear that they're bad, and so they end up doing a lot of good to kind of counteract that. And so they end up just being super detail oriented and very on time, and just generally perfectionists. In health, they go to 7, and so they are able to have a lot more fun when they're healthy. They're able to kind of tell their inner critic to shut up and be the life of the party, and then when they're unhealthy, they go to type 4 and they take on the bad parts of a type 4, and so they just become very self-obsessed and kind of stuck in their own world of negativity because they're unhealthy, so they're going to be stuck in their own world of negativity. So then to move on to type 2, and I'm going to try to do this for every single thing so that you can go through and kind of see where my fingers are for each definition of each type. But so for type 2, type 2s are labeled the helpers, and that is because that is what they do. They're the best lovers of people. They are fabulous human beings. Yeah, I love type 2s. I love every type, but I love type 2s. And something that I meant to cover in the beginning was that a lot of you probably tested as a type 2. And the reason for this is because the test, the personality type indicator, which you probably just took, was just isn't super accurate. What is going to be a lot more accurate is talking to someone who's very well versed in the Enneagram or becoming very well versed in the Enneagram yourself. So I'm actually going to have, I'm going to put my number at the end of this video and probably in the description box. And if you would like to truly find out your Enneagram type, because the personality typing system is just not very accurate at all. Like, I know for me, I had to become very well versed in the Enneagram in order to find my type, because I just kept typing as something that I wasn't, because very few people are so, actually no one no one is so so not boring, but so simple that they're able to be defined by bubbling in a couple answers. They're going to be a lot more complex than that, and like I said, the Enneagram is all about your motivation, what hurt you are motivated by, and that isn't really something that you can test for. So I'm going to have my number at the end of this so that you guys can reach out and ask me questions, have me ask you questions, and then at the end have me be like, hey, it seems like you're motivated by this. It's my favorite thing to do. I love it. We're all quarantined, so yeah, so we can just have a little chat about the Enneagram. Okay, so type 2 are the helpers, and on kind of a worse note, what they can also be called are the martyrs. And this is because their hurt that they're constantly carrying is feeling like they need to love well in order to be loved. And so they feel like they are inherently not deserving of your love. And so they try to love others well enough to finally deserve love themselves. And yeah. And so sometimes their acts of service tend to be more manipulative than they are actually loving, because they don't know, they have been hurt by feeling like they don't deserve their own love, and so they give everyone else their love and try to make up for the fact that they have a hard time loving themselves through everyone else's love. And that's a very common habit, and so that's why so many people test as type 2s, because we all kind of will manipulate people just a little bit to kind of get the action that we want from them. We're human beings, and so that's kind of something that we do. But what makes it different for type 2s is that they will be so defined by their love for other people, that they won't know themselves well enough to love themselves. So they have a hard time with a sense of self. They feel like they're constantly all about other people, and so they have a hard time knowing themselves at all. And in stress, they go to type 8. They take on the bad parts of an 8, and so they become very aggressive, whereas they're normally fairly soft-spoken people. They can be competitive, but they're normally fairly soft-spoken. So they become aggressive, they become very domineering, and generally their acts of love will then start to feel kind of like a punch in the face. Like, I made you this pie, why didn't you make me a pie? They'll kind of get mad at you for not loving them as well as you're loving them as well as they are loving you. But in health, great news for type 2s is that they will go to type 4, and so they will begin to get to know themselves, because 4s know themselves super well. They live in their own heads, and they're very emotional people, just emotionally based people. And so when a 2 goes to 4 in health, they finally get to know themselves, and get to know their emotions, and finally begin loving themselves, which is a problem we all have, is finding love for ourselves. But with 2s, it's much different. Then type 3s. Type 3s are called the achiever, and this is because their hurt that they're kind of always carrying is feeling like they're only worthy of love if they are great achievers, if they have achieved huge things. And so I know a type 3 who is the youngest manager at Worlds of Fun that there has ever been, because she is so hardworking and fun and high energy, and but that's because she feels like that's not because she's legitimately very hardworking. But what creates that hardworking personality in all 3s is feeling like they're defined by their achievements, and so they collect all these achievements in order to find love for themselves. And so they're typically highly competitive, they're typically very high energy, and they're kind of, when they get a little more unhealthy, they kind of compete with you to see who can be the best conversationalist, to see who can be the best at walking, to see, my dad's a 3, and so I know type 3s pretty well, and they're very competitive people. So yeah, in stress they go to type 9. Yeah, in stress they go to type 9, and instead of being as hardworking and go and competitive, they take on the bad parts of a type 9, and they become very lazy, and they love to take naps, and they just kind of start blowing everything off. But when they get healthier, they take on the great parts of a type 6, and they provide a lot of stability and comfort, and are able to see past their achievements to finally, or see past themselves to finally start loving the world around them well. So once they're healthy, they tend to build a very strong community around them, and be great friends and high achieving friends. They will be the best friend. They'll bring you muffins, they'll knit you a scarf, they'll knit you a scarf. But they take on the great parts of a type 6 in health. So type 4s, I've touched on them a little bit, but type 4s are the individualist, and the hurt that they kind of carry around with them is feeling like, and this is 4s are very complex, because they tend to speak in metaphor, and everything has a greater meaning, and they're poets and artists and just deeply emotional people, and so their hurt is extremely complex, just like them. So their hurt is essentially that they feel they've been left out of life, and so they constantly feel like everyone else had like a guidebook on how to be human that they didn't get. And so they're constantly like, how do I act normal? How do I act normal? And then out of that, they start to embrace the fact that they're not normal, or become almost like obsessed with being unique, doing things a little different. A type 4 that I know is a huge bookworm who refuses to read the Harry Potter series because it's too mainstream, and kind of refuses to read any mainstream books. So in stress, they kind of lose this amazing ability to understand emotion, to understand themselves, to understand their own emotions. They kind of lose that and become upset. They go to 2 in stress, and so they become obsessed with other people's emotions and everyone else being okay, and all that stuff, because their own emotions will be so hard for them to handle, because they feel things so deeply that they push them aside and they say, okay, how can I worry about you? How can you be my priority? And they really just completely disconnect from themselves, to almost use the other people in their life to fill in the gaps of the whole self that they just threw away. They'll start using other people to kind of fill that in for them. And then in health, they go to goodness, where do they go in health? They go to 2 in stress, and then in health. I might actually have to look at this one. I think. So type 4 in health, okay, goes to type 1. And they're always right next to each other, and so I can never remember that. But they go to type 1, and so they kind of start seeing, when they're in stages of normalcy, they are typically just a little, not self-obsessed, but they live in their own world, and so they can't really see past their world. And then when they start going into health, how 1s are kind of all about their world, and making sure their world is perfect, 4s then start to better their world in a very similar way, and kind of start to see past themselves and use their understanding of emotions to help the world be a better place. And they normally do that through art. So, they write poetry, they make things, they sing, they just all different kinds of art. So type 5 is the investigator, and the hurt that they've kind of always carried with them is this feeling of ineptness. They feel like they are inept to, I'm so sorry if you can hear my 3-year-old brother screaming. They feel they're inept to handle life, almost. And so out of that, they try to know as much as they can, and not experience as much as they can, but they end up experiencing as much as they can because they want to learn so that they won't be inept anymore. 5s are typically huge hermits, just because people kind of are the thing that have made them feel inept, and so they tend to keep to themselves and only talk when they definitely know what they're talking about, and 5s tend to have different niches of interest that they will know everything about. And so, like I said, I'm fairly influenced by type 5, and so the Enneagram is one of the things that that because of my 5 influence, I know way too much about it. And they'll kind of go through stages in their lives where they'll be obsessed with this, they'll be obsessed with this, they'll be obsessed with this. And so mine were Enneagram, big cats, like lions and tigers and bears, but lions and tigers and just African wildlife. I can tell you the food chain right now. But musical theater, music, Hamilton, just I have these different pockets of like, I know everything about this. It was Greek gods for a while, which we all went through a Greek god phase because of Percy Jackson, but it was Harry Potter for a while, it was football for a while, where I would just get really obsessed with a specific thing. Normally after someone knew more about it than me, it would make me feel inept, and then I would be like, I'm gonna know everything about this thing now. And so, yeah, that's kind of where they're coming from, and an example of the tendencies of type 5s. And then you have type 6, and type 6s, are really interesting types, and I say that as someone who didn't know I was a type 6 for a very long time, and they are kind of one of the mysteries of the Enneagram is how Chris Hewerts, the author of The Sacred Enneagram, which is a wonderful Enneagram book, describes it. They are one of the great mysteries of the Enneagram because you have this thing called a phobic 6 and a counterphobic 6. It is the only type where there's a counter type. I personally theorize that every type has a counter type that hasn't been fully discovered yet, and honestly, I would love to do an experiment on that because as far as I know, there haven't been any yet. But so type 6s have phobic 6s and counterphobic 6s. Counterphobic 6s will be the counter type. And so 6s are, I feel like it's about to get real personal, y'all. But 6s, this hurt that they're carrying around with them is this constant feeling of danger and insecurity. And so out of that, they become obsessed with safety and security. And so a lot of the caricatures that you'll see of the type 6 is very nervous, very safety conscious, very, if you picture like typical suburban mom, like a Karen would probably be like, that's a caricature of a type 6, where she's just very nervous about everything, very concerned with everything. Is that going to go correctly? Kind of is a little bit of a micromanager. But because of that, 6s also give out the security that they wish people would give to them. And so they tend to be, 6s and 2s are some of the best friends you'll ever have in your life. Just because a 6's goal is to make you feel safe and cared about, because they feel unsafe and not uncared about, but insecure in relationship with you. But what's interesting about the type 6 is the counterphobic type 6, which is what I am. And essentially a counterphobic type 6 basically says, okay, I'm scared of everything. I'm gonna make myself do everything. I'm gonna push right into that fear and kind of show it who's boss. And so I know for me, I have some pretty severe anxiety, specifically social anxiety, but I talk a lot, and it's because I'm constantly pushing into that fear in a way that I didn't understand for a while. I was like, how am I this anxious all the time? But it's almost like people don't believe counterphobic 6s because they don't act fearful. I do not act fearful unless you know me very well. But yeah, I don't, and counterphobic 6s will not act fearful even though their motivation is fear. And so they tend to be daredevils, but just because they're so terrified of everything that they have to do it, just to almost test the fact that they're going to be okay. 6s have this innate idea that is they're not going to be okay. And so phobic 6s try to make sure that the world is okay, that their friends are okay, because then they'll be okay. But counterphobic 6s say, it's gonna be okay, so how many things can I test to make sure that it's gonna be okay? And in stress, we go to type 3, and so we become very image conscious and very concerned with how people are seeing us. And then in health, we go to type 9, and all of our constant worrying kind of chills out and becomes a lot more peaceful, which is great. So then type 7 is called the enthusiast, and to be completely honest, I'm going to go ahead and look up the hurt of the type 7 just because it's the hardest for me to understand, and I find that my words tend to not be able to truly encompass the type 7 and everything that a type 7 is. I do have a lot of 7 influences. 7, I can't tell you about their personality without telling you necessarily about their hurt while this loads, but 7s are the life of the party. They are the most fun, up for anything, so many ideas constantly, a lot of energy, and they are a walking party. My mom is a type 7, and so when you have a type 6 and a type 7 together, they argue a lot, but they also, the type 6 almost keeps the type 7 safe, while the 7 reminds the 6, hey, life's also a good time and we should have fun. And so it's an interesting dynamic between me and my mom, me being a 6 and her being a 7, and me being influenced by 7. 6s with 7 wings are kind of like very contradictory, because they tend to be counterphobic, just because they want to have as much fun as possible, but then also are cautious and security conscious. Okay, so type 7s are essentially, so I'm trying to find it. So their basic fear, okay, I'm so sorry, I'm trying to find it. I just listened to there's an awesome Enneagram podcast done by Sleeping at Last, who created 9 different songs for the 9 different types, and they're beautiful. Like, they're just beautiful. And so 7s are essentially, their hurt has essentially been hurt. So their basic fear, which is essentially what I'm talking about when I'm talking about every type having been hurt in some way, it will then become what they're afraid of, and then their personality is built out of that. So in the Enneagram, it's called a basic fear. So their basic fear is of being deprived and in pain, which is why this is so complex for me, because I feel like everyone's afraid of being deprived and in pain, but the thing about the 7 is that they will do whatever it takes to not be deprived or in pain. So 7s tend to be this really, really good time because of how scared they are of being in pain. And 7s, Tigger is a 7. And so Tigger is the best example of a 7. And most Disney characters and Disney princesses, Joy is honestly probably the best example of this in Inside Out. Joy is a 7. And so she avoids any kind of pain for her kid, which is Riley. And so she avoids pain so much that it's unhealthy. But this is normally because 7s will have been hurt in such a huge way, and because of their really fun personality, not have the right tools to handle it or to fix it. And so they'll find themselves in pain, and not be able to, I'm so sorry, you can hear my brother, and not be able to fix it. And so they're carrying this memory or this idea that they are not capable of dealing with their hurt. And so out of that, they avoid it at any cost. And so even if it's healthy for them to finally deal with their pain and their hurt, it's very hard for 7s to be sad for very long, to be fearful for very long. And they are huge optimists, and they do this thing called reframing, which everyone reframes, but 7s are kind of known for it. Reframing was actually a vocab term a while ago, but it's basically when you take a bad situation and you're like, but here's what could actually be good about it. Here, I can reframe this so that this is actually great news that you twisted your ankle. You get to eat more ice cream, and you don't have to play sports anymore. You just get to chillax. You get to ride the elevator. And so your 7s will typically be the people who you can't imagine them unhappy. You can't. 7s are also the rarest Enneagram. No, 4s are the rarest. 7s are the second rarest Enneagram type. 6s are the third. But so 7s are the second rarest. 4s are the rarest. And so yeah, 7's personality is essentially built around the avoidance of pain. And a 7 goes to 1 when they're unhealthy, and so you take this person who used to be a lot of fun and bubbly and wonderful, and then they become extremely critical of themselves, of everyone around them, of the world, of anything that they can criticize, they criticize it. But when they become healthier, they take on the great parts of a type 5, and so 7s as well as 5 will oftentimes have some niches of things that they're super crazy interested in, and things that they just are super passionate about and love. And when 7s begin to be healthier, they begin finally taking time to be in their heads, because 5s are so far in their head. 4s and 5s definitely they live in their heads. 4s probably live in their hearts, but 5s are just extremely logical, clear-headed, and so a normally reckless 7 becomes more able to handle their pain and more willing to sit down with it and think about it. Then 8s, I am dating an 8, and it's an adventure. So type 8s, their hurt is that they're carrying around with them is essentially that they cannot be vulnerable, otherwise someone will use them or manipulate them. And so 8s typically act out of that as very powerful personalities. Just very loud, very gruff. If they're not loud, they're very gruff. They kind of poke at you. They love to poke at you, and almost they try to see how close they can get you to snapping, to kind of test where the boundaries are. But yeah, some great examples of type 8s are Chance Tasha, my boyfriend, and Mr. Dom is a huge type 8 with a 7 wing. So he, if any of you have had him, he is kind of a teacher that pokes at you, and he'll kind of see how much you can take, almost to the point of being mean sometimes, which 8s don't perceive that as being mean, ever. They just view it as them being playful, them being high energy, them being fun. But yeah, so 8s, when they're unhealthy, they go to 5, and they stop having as much energy and become so involved in their minds that it almost drives them insane. And they kind of become a recluse just because they feel like they can't trust anyone, and now because they're taking on almost the hurt of a type 5 as well, they always kind of feel like they are not capable of handling people anymore in a way that's kind or in a way that's gentle. Yeah. Type 8s then, when they're healthy, go to type 2. Mother Teresa was a type 8 because when type 8s are healthy, no one will care more about the world than a type 8. No one will care more about the betterment of the world and actually be able to enact it because of the amount of energy that they bring to the table and the amount of forcefulness, and you have never been loved harder than when you are loved by an 8. We have some close family friends that are also 8s, and when 8s are healthy, they take on the great parts of a 2, and so you have this power of a type 8's personality, but now they're also extremely centered around loving other people, and so they take all of their power and they love the world extremely well. And so that's why I use the example of Mother Teresa, because most people assume she was a 2 because of how she loved the world, but in reality she was this 8 who had enough power and enough personality and enough drive to be able to better the world in a really real way. Bernie Sanders is also a huge type 8, and you'll find a lot of socialists and communists who are type 8s because type 8s are so forceful that they believe in the most drastic thing. Fidel Castro was a type 8. And so they believe in the most drastic thing for the betterment of people. They believe that no one should go hungry, so they're gonna divide the wealth evenly. But yeah, so type 8s are these, I prefer, rather than the challenger, I prefer for type 8s the missionary, just because that's kind of who they are, who they become in health. Rather than challenging you all the time, they love the world in such a hands-on way. Then last but not least is my personal favorite type. You're not supposed to have favorites, but I do. My favorite type and the last type is a type 9, and they are called the peacemaker, and this is probably the name for the type that I most agree with. And so a type 9, their hurt is essentially conflict in general. They have found themselves unable to handle conflict making them feel vulnerable, or conflict leaving them feeling like their world has kind of been flipped on its head. And so because of that, they are these people who avoid conflict at any cost, and are just very peaceful. And the thing I love most about 9s is their almost unwavering kindness and peacefulness. They are just very concerned with everyone being happy with them, everyone being happy with each other, but something that kind of becomes unhealthy about that is sometimes conflict is necessary in order to grow. And so you'll find 9s kind of having some stunted growth, because how you grow is through going through hard things. And a way that type 9s and type 7s are super similar is that they neither of them want to go through hard things, and with 7s, it's because they feel as if they are incapable of handling it, and with type 9s, it's because they're afraid of conflict, due to it making them feel so powerless in the past. In stress, type 9s go to type 6, and so you find this really peaceful type becoming very anxious, very concerned with their safety, a lot more hands-on instead of like, everything will be okay, que sera. It's more like, it's the end of the world as we know it, is kind of what is happening in a 9's brain when they're unhealthy. And they just become very like, is this gonna be okay? Is this gonna be okay? Is this gonna be okay? And then when they're healthy, you find type 9s who, because of their peacefulness, can also just be a little lazy. You will never find someone who loves naps as much as a type 9, or who is able to fall asleep as quickly and as easily as a type 9, just because they kind of always want to go to sleep. It's their favorite. But when they're healthy, they move to type 3, and they are kind of able to move away from their tendency to avoid work, to avoid anything which may build conflict within themselves, and they do really great things. And so my favorite example of a type 9 is Miss Bella Cordero. She took a huge conflict that happened in her life, to say the least. I don't know if you know Bella's story, but she went through something really hard, and then out of that she created something called Stars Over Scars, which raised tons of money through the arts. I'm so sorry, you can talk about conflict. There's a 3-year-old screaming. But she created something using art that was just really beautiful out of something really painful, and raised a ton of money for victims of sexual assault and for the local women's shelter. And so Bella is just this amazing example of what a healthy 9 looks like. She is one of the most hardworking people that I know. She's my best friend, and she's one of the most hardworking people I know. And so she has done galleries for photography. She got a full ride to the Arts Institute in Kansas City because of how much she has done with art. But I was on the phone with her the other day, and we were talking about virtual school, and she was like, Jada, I've had to trap myself in to get this done. And I was like, what do you mean you've had to trap yourself in? And so then she FaceTimed me, and she showed me that she had moved all of the furniture in her room around her chair and like little desk, so that she told me, she was like, I had to move it so that in order to like go lay down on my bed and watch Netflix and take a nap, it would require a lot of work. Because she just kept saying, like, I'd have to slither under this chair, and then I'd have to go over this other thing, or I'd just have to move it again, and that'd be so much work. And I was like, Bella, this is the perfect example of like a healthy type 9 making themselves get things done. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's so true. But yeah, that's a type 9. Just very peaceful, kind of sleepy. Winnie the Pooh is a wonderful example of a type 9. You can't hate a type 9. You just can't. Just because they're so peaceful and normally very kind. And yeah, so that's every single type, and their hurt and their personality and where they go in health and in stress. And so yeah, that's kind of how all of that works. And I definitely did not keep consistent with like the holding the fingers in the air thing, so I'm so sorry for any of you that were like, oh, I really just wanted to know about the type that I tested as. And I'm going to repeat again here at the end that the test is just not very accurate. It's just not very accurate. And talking to someone who is well versed in the Enneagram will probably be a lot more accurate and successful and honestly in depth, because I'll be able to tell you more about your wing. I'll be able to tell you more about your wing, probably about where you are in health and in stress, and then beyond that, the last thing that I'm probably going to cover with y'all is called tri-typing. Oh, I have two more things to cover: subtypes and tri-typing. So I'm going to start with tri-typing. I just forgot the word for it. But so again, the Enneagram just made sure to keep personality extremely fluid and extremely specific to you. And so tri-typing is essentially, I'm just going to give you an example. So my tri-type is a 6 to 8. And that essentially means that after 6, because I'm a 6, I will be heavily influenced by 2, and after 2, I will be heavily influeed by 8, which, because I'm a counterphobic 6, I tend to act like an 8. It's just how it is. But so my tri-type is a 6 to 8, and so there is a specific name for each tri-type, and it will go further into depth of who you are. And so I know for the 6 to 8, that combination of types tends to create someone who is very forcefully caring about the world. I can't remember the specific name for it, but essentially what the definition was someone who is forcefully caring about the world. And yeah, because both 6s and 8s are this huge personality, but 6s care about their people and safety and security a lot, and then 2s have some of the same influences where they want people to be as loved as possible, and then 8s bring all that power. And so yeah, so for each tri-type you'll have a different personality, and so I feel like my tri-type was just spot on. Just kind of saying that I tend to be pretty forceful, but it comes from a very good place. So that's tri-typing, and each and everyone has a tri-type, and how that's decided is within the Enneagram. I'm going to open my computer here again. If it's charged, it might not be charged anymore, and I'm just going to have to tell you without a visual aid. Yeah. So with tri-typing, in the Enneagram there are different triads. There's the heart triad, the head triad, and the body triad. And I'm not going to get into all the triads and stuff today because it is pretty, not confusing, but it's very complex. And so you have these different triads throughout the Enneagram that, so like the 7, 5, and 6, I don't know why I didn't say those in order, 5, 6, and 7 are the head triad, and so we live the most in our heads. The 4, the 3, and the 2 are the heart triad, and so they live the most in their hearts. The 8, 9, and 1 are the body triad, and so they live the most in their body or with their physical surroundings. And then all around the Enneagram, there are these different triads that essentially tell you your motivation. And so for those triads, like the 5, 6, and 7 are also the fear triad, and so we're most motivated by fear. 9, 8, and 1 are most motivated by anger. And then I think for 3 and 2 are sadness, jealousy, or something like that. But yeah, so that's also a huge part of the Enneagram, that kind of helps you understand yourself, because when I kind of realized that I was being motivated by fear, it was like, oh, I get it now. Or when Bella realized that such a peaceful person could be motivated actually by anger, it was something that she kind of had to like dig through and realize, because 9s have a very hard time letting themselves be angry, just because they're avoiding conflict. But 9s, honestly, they have something called latent anger, which essentially is them just ignoring their anger, and then they blow up, just because they've suppressed all that anger for so long because they feel like they don't get to be angry. But yeah, so I guess I just kind of explained triads, even though I said that I wasn't going to. But yeah, those are triads, and so how tri-typing works is it's one type from each of the triads. Head, heart, and body. It's one type from each of the triads. And with head, mind, and my gosh, I keep doing that. With head, heart, and body, the one in the middle is actually the most disconnected from that part of themselves. So that's a really interesting thing to learn about in the Enneagram, but it's significantly less scientific and a lot more spiritual. And so I'm gonna leave that up to Chris Hewitts and up to those other really deeply spiritual Enneagram experts to define to you if you want to know a little more about it. Other people have much better words than mine to kind of describe those. So that's tri-typing. And then subtyping, one of my favorite parts of the Enneagram is essentially there are 3 different kinds of every single type. There will be, and don't giggle at this, because I don't know why it's called this, but don't giggle, but there is the sexual subtype, the self-preservation subtype, and the social subtype. The sexual subtype can also be called the one-on-one subtype. But so each of these different subtypes are going to create a different kind of that personality. And so a counterphobic 6 is a sexual 6, or a one-on-one 6. It's the subtype that creates the countertype, if that makes any sense, which 6s are thought to be the only type with a countertype. I feel like there will be later research on that, which will find that every type has a countertype, whether that is the social subtype or the self-preservation subtype of different types. But for 6, the countertype of the type is the sexual subtype. So with every number, you have there's the sexual 2, the social 2, and the self-preservation 2. There is the sexual 3, social 3, and self-preservation 3, and it essentially is how you're interacting with the world. It's honestly almost throwing in this idea of introversion and extroversion and somewhere in between, even though amtroversion does not exist. But it's essentially how you're interacting with the world. And so a sexual 6 is going to act completely different than a self-preservation 6 or even a social 6. And a self-preservation 7 is going to act totally different than a social 7. And a social 8 is going to act totally different than a sexual 8. But everyone fits into one of the subtypes. But it's just another way that the Enneagram can be tailored to who you are instead of just who your type is. Which, yeah, I think I've pretty much been over everything that you could ask about the Enneagram, except I know that a huge question that I had for a really long time that I had to do a lot of research to kind of answer is whether or not you were born with your type. which is a continuing debate in psychology, is this idea of nature versus nurture, and it is the same within the Enneagram. Some people believe that you are born with your type, and that this hurt that you end up taking on is a byproduct of your type. Like, this type is just going to be hurt like this. Kind of like if you're knock-kneed, then when you run, you're going to fall down. Just kind of, it's a byproduct like that. If you're, I'm not going to list other examples, but, because that almost got offensive. But, yeah, if you have this specific type, you're going to have this specific ailment, which causes this specific hurt. So that's one idea, but you also have those same people saying, don't type children, don't type children, don't type children, which I agree with. Do not hand children this tool, because they will begin to place themselves in a box and it will stunt their development. But what I personally believe is that your type is actually nurture, because I feel like, so this hurt that I've been talking about this whole time, this basic fear, this hurt that people carry, is actually referred to as their childhood wound. And so it is how their environment hurt them as a kid. And I feel like how your environment hurts you when you're a kid is going to then have a lot to do with who you end up becoming. And so I know for me, I moved around a ton. And so of course I would end up becoming a type 6 who's so concerned with my security and with my safety, because how often I was moving meant that there was some instability there. But yeah, I think a lot of different people would have taken it a lot of different ways. So I think that personality is super complex, and could be part nature, part nurture. But I personally am on the nurture side. I feel like if you can be trained to behave a certain way, then who you are probably has a lot to do with having been trained to be a certain way. Having learned that a certain type of behavior makes you feel better. And yeah, so that's the Enneagram. I am Jada Dickens, and I really enjoyed telling you guys all about it. My number, if you would like to text me with any questions you have about the Enneagram, or if you just want to chat during quarantine, excuse me, my number is 816-507-2940. So yeah, if you want to text me and figure out your Enneagram type, then I would love to do that with you. It is one of my favorite things to do. At the Senior Girls Lock-In, I sat down with like a group of 6 girls, and we all talked about the Enneagram, and then they were like, type me, and so it's just super fun figuring out what your type is, and then being able to grow because of that, and just making sure that your type is as accurate as possible is really important if you're going to continue using this as a tool. So the type indicator test just isn't very accurate. I will continue repeating that until the day that I die. And it will be a lot more accurate to either get to know it yourself, or the easier thing to do would just be having me type you, or if you know someone else, if you have someone else in your life who is super well versed in the Enneagram, have them type you, and talk to them, and get to know your motivation, and then from there get to know who you can become at your best. So yeah, if you want to learn more about the Enneagram on your own, The Enneagram Institute is where you're going to find a lot of information. My favorite thing that they do is they have gone through, and if you look at relationships with other types, they have a whole thing written out with how ones interact with ones, how ones interact with twos, how ones interact with threes, how ones interact with fours, and they do that for all of the types, how they all interact with each other. I just think it's super interesting. I would definitely recommend the Enneagram Institute for any further learning, along with Chris Hewert's book, The Sacred Enneagram, and definitely check out Sleeping at Last's music for each type. It's just really beautiful and really gets at who each of the types are, and is beautiful music. He's a wonderful musician. But yeah, I think that's all from me. Thank you for making it through this whole thing and listening to me the entire way as I blabber on. But yeah, thank you so much.